Thank you for having us on, and thank you for doing this little roundtable.
Yeah, I think it's important now because, I think Tracy, you've been at it for 4 years now, and Randy, you've been at it for three years, and
Correct.
it seems like everybody started around October. You know,
Something about the fall.
yeah. You started in 2018 around October, and then Randy, you started around the same time in 2019, and I started in 2020 around October. So here we are. I think every October might we might get on this roundtable, and hopefully we can put some new faces in the next sessions. So
Yeah.
you know, Tracy, you brought up some ideas about these stories of ours that we talk about on these podcasts, and we're part of this bigger AAPI umbrella. Can we talk about that?
Oh, yeah. So I don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot. And I'd love to get your perspective because I don't know if it's because I'm from the East Coast, but I'm very excited that people are paying attention to Asian American and Pacific Islander American stories and history. But I have been finding that the major initiatives that are happening are centered around East Asians. And I think that Southeast Asians is a very small part so far of the whole blanket term AAPI. And I don't know if it's an East Coast thing that's making me think and ponder and notice this. I don't know, like in the West Coast, because there's a bigger concentration of Vietnamese Americans, if it's different. But I'd love to get your perspective because one, I'd love to see if there's differences regionally or what you guys are seeing, but also why is that? And, what can we do about it?
Randy?
It's a really good question here, and I'm still marinating it. And to hop off of what Tracy was mentioning, that it tends to be very East Asian centric, but also very coastal centric as well. I'm from the Midwest, and
Mm.
so I think it's important to. And actually, I was wondering if you can repeat that question because I want to make sure I'm getting this correct for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really, it's honestly, it's just me kind of pondering my own thoughts. But the fact that AAPI, the term itself, is a lot more recognized than it was when we were growing up. I think Randy, you and I have had discussions on other panels around this. And I don't know if, like, on the East Coast, there just tends to be more initiatives around East Asian stories and history, or if that's like a statement across America. And I ask that question because I don't know as much in the Midwest, but in the West Coast, I can imagine that Vietnamese stories are more prominent. And a lot of creators that we have today come from the West Coast. And so I don't know if there's differences regionally or if you guys are seeing something similar.
Yeah, I know that there's like other podcasts. There's Southern Fried Asian that focuses on the southern part of the U.S., which I think is a very important part of the Asian American stories that are out there. I know that there, as far as podcasting is concerned, from the Vietnamese, the Southeast Asian standpoint in the South, I'm not seeing it personally. Although I would like to apologize to anyone if I've missed anyone on that. I I think it's very important to also recognize that yeah, the Southeast Asian communities heavily exist in places like Texas, Louisiana, Alabama. Um, when we think of AAPI, we're also losing, and this has been a criticism from the Pacific Islander communities that we're not centering them at all in any of our stories to the point where there is actually a call for separation between Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And I can't blame them because we haven't done our part to include them in part of our stories. So I think the landscape of podcasting, especially from the Asian American lens, is still circling through.
Mhm.
I think it has not been a united front or unified front at this time. I'd like to see it get to. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see the gap being bridged very soon on this because I do see that there is a lot of disconnection in some ways. I don't want to sound so pessimistic about it. I think there's a lot of wonderful things that are happening in the Asian American podcasting communities. We're seeing more Asian American listeners increase. We're seeing more Asian American podcasters starting to take up space, which is wonderful. But it's still, in a way, in the past 2 years, we're still at kind of in an infancy level. I don't think we're quite there yet, and I think we got a long way to go, and that there is still a disconnect between other communities, and there's a disproportionate number of East Asian podcasters versus the Southeast Asian or South Asians and Pacific Islander communities. So yeah, I think it's still kind of early to grasp, but we're seeing the trend that's been
But that
uh,
goes beyond
yeah.
podcasting, don't you guys think?
Yeah,
Like
I
it's
agree.
not just, yeah,
I
go ahead.
agree. I'm happy that the East Asians are getting recognition and they're getting their voices out there. But you're right. The Southeast Asians are not really noticed in the landscape, and the voices of Southeast Asians are not very loud yet. But I think that the job that we have, frankly, is really to find more and to encourage more. And Tracy and Randy, you both are veterans at this. 4 years. It's
Relative.
yeah, it's all relative, but I mean, you look at the ratings and stuff like that on different things, and you see that you guys have made the most traction in the work, but we need to get more podcasters, because I've said this from day one. The way we're going to do this is really to encourage and inspire more podcasters to come on the air. Viet Cetera in Vietnam does a terrific job of raising and really bringing on new voices. They have this sort of search talent show, whatever you want to call it, every year, and they have hundreds of submissions, and then they pick out like the best 10, and then they just foster it. And we don't have sort of like that kind of incubation or incubator here for podcasting, but along the American communities, they do have those kind of programs, and they're financed, and they throw money at it. And I think it's up to us to really lift it, because our stories are not, we haven't even hit the surface yet.
Yeah, and I think part of it is it's probably early on
Yeah.
for our community. I mean, when you think of some of the other Asian communities, the longevity that they've had here in America, is their history is a little bit greater than Southeast Asians. But I think Randy mentioned something that is key here is the united front. And I think, Ken,
Yeah.
you were kind of getting to that, is that we're now in a space, and I think our generation and younger is kind of growing up. We're exploring these creative outlets that maybe older generations didn't feel like they have the freedom to do so because of all the complications of being immigrants and refugees, etc. So I feel like we're in the early stages, but I ponder the question of like, how can we like accelerate the different types of work that not only us as creators in podcasting, but like nonprofit organizations, filmmakers, writers, everything feels very individual right now still. And I think sometimes it's that united front that creates something bigger, something more invested in. So I threw that question out there because it's something I've been thinking about a lot.
Well, how do we get our community to recognize more of this work?
Yeah.
I I think for myself, like this year, I've actually been invited to speak at universities, DePaul University and UIC, both of schools that I've attended, and I connected with their Asian American programs. And what I find very important is the best way to reach out is going where young people are at.
Mm.
I think it's very important to frame podcasting as not just a free time hobby, right? We want to frame it as a part of a storytelling, a part of documenting history, working with professors who are deeply involved with the historical work. I know, Tracy, you've done archiving work too, and I know you've been connecting with other nonprofits, working with other nonprofit communities in the Southeast Asian communities could also be very key in this because they're starting to see the value of podcasting, and I've had many conversations with executive directors to associate directors and staff, and they find that podcasting is a good avenue to listen to what's going on in the community. They see it as an opportunity to showcase their work. And so bringing in people like us or any other podcasters can be very much an asset. So a couple of years ago, this conversation probably wouldn't happen, but
Yeah.
now we are at least it's getting mentioned out there. And there's some people that I know that have not listened to a podcast before
There's a
in
lot.
Asian American communities.
There's a lot.
There's plenty, but when we introduce our work, then we're actually planting a seed. And I've seen some people actually convert to being podcast listeners, or at least using someone's podcast for their curriculum or for um, as part of a project. So there's opportunities out there.
What are some of your favorite podcasts, whether they're in the Southeast Asian space or American space? What do you guys consume?
Can I be very honest? I love listening to both of your podcasts very much. I don't say this to kiss ass because we're on right now, but I think what I like about both of your podcasts, well, one for the Vietnamese podcast, my mom actually listens to it, and I've told you that it's very rare for me to introduce something like that to my mom unless I feel it's something that's beneficial to her and for myself that we could both bond and listen to. And so I love the fact that you bring in a vast area of guests on that are from the Vietnamese diaspora or who are Vietnamese Americans or just Vietnamese in general. And I think it really fits so well across the generational around the generational gaps. And for Tracey, I really love the storytelling aspect of your work. I am a huge fan, and I was blessed to be on your show a few years ago. So it's allowed me to un- to find new people to follow, and some of these people that I followed end up becoming my friends. So I'm very grateful for both of that. Um, aside from your aside from the two podcasts that I mentioned, I'm a big fan of Politically Asian. I think they get into a deeper dive into the political landscape, and they do things in a very unapologetic way, which works for me because I'm a person who's tends to be very progressive and outspoken in my politics, sometimes in my podcasts, and I feel like sometimes a show like that is a good kick in the spark for that. So
Mm.
I'm a big fan of their work. Uh, yeah, there's hasn't been too many current podcasts that I've listened to. I do listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, which is a very popular genre of the podcasting sector. So yeah.
Yeah, I know. I love true crime and like Dateline shows.
Yes, me too.
I feel like I answered this question last time I talked to you, Ken. So I'm going to flip it back to you. What are some of your favorites?
I listen to there's this podcast called My First Million. It's a business podcast, and they go so wide and so deep with strategy and different. They actually talk about the numbers of podcasting. Like they break down like different stages of like different podcasters and kind of money behind different deals, and it's all very intriguing because what I've learned a lot through that podcast is that the stuff that we do just takes time and a lot of volume. Takes a lot of just episodes, and really the reps is what I've learned from My First Million. So I consume that a lot, and I listen to Lex Friedman and Andrew Huberman and a lot of these science ones that because I just don't know a lot about tech and science and tech, but I spend a lot of my time listening to audible books that are written by Vietnamese writers because there's so many now that it would take you years to consume all of these Vietnamese writers. And they're Vietnamese American, Vietnamese Australians, British writers. So I like try to Alongside the film people, I really focus on those two as much as I can, and then obviously I get into the comedians and stuff like that. But there's so much Audible books that I listen to when I have free time, and then obviously the other podcaster. But then so it's funny that we're talking about this, but we don't have other people in our space that we're listening to, right? We don't have other
Um,
Southeast Asians that
There
we're
isn't. There used.
yeah, it's two Saigoneers show every now and then. I don't know if you've heard their stuff. Um, and it's quick bites. Sometimes it's long, sometimes it's short, but I occasionally will flip through. I don't commute on a regular basis
Mm,
to an office anymore, like most of us. So that was when I consumed a
yeah.
lot of podcasts and audio content. And so now for me, most of the time when I consume it, it's if I'm on long road trips. I know a lot of people consume it like when they're multitasking. I don't have that brain
Yeah,
function
neither
to,
do I.
to do audio and clean the house.
Yeah.
Um, so so I've had to really like net down what I listen to. And so for me, I have to like really love it to listen to every episode. But most of the time, I just listen to certain episodes of a show that I love. And I think most listeners are like that. Most listeners are kind of like either they're binge listening when they discover something they love, or they're just jumping around, right? But Saigon is interesting. There's another one, Overseas Vietnamese. Have
Oh
you heard of?
yeah.
Yeah,
They
I don't know
release
if they're still
they
producing.
don't, and it's such a pity because I love that they're I think they've only have 10.
Yeah, I
Oh my
think the
God.
concept was there, right? The concept was there. And, like you guys have said before, it's a lot of work. It doesn't seem like it. People think we just come on and we
Yeah.
talk. And yes, that's a lot of what we do. But actually, the behind the scenes is a lot of work, right? But the concept was there, and they have a couple of interviews where it's quite interesting to listen to people who, are either born and raised or just spent their whole life outside of Vietnam. And now it's like they're going back to Vietnam, and like, they're all about rediscovering themselves by living there, working there, building families there. And then there's just, I don't know, I find it very varied and interesting. And it's one of the first few that I've discovered that is more transnational.
Right.
I admit my show is very US centric. And I know I have listeners all over, but the majority of my guests are US based.
Yeah. I love that you brought up that podcast because it's God, it's such a pity that it just stopped, you
Maybe
know.
we should call them Mai, and Mai is one of the co-founders. I forgot the other one's name.
Yeah. They had something there, and that's the thing. That's like so many people. That's why I really admire both of your work. I've admired it from afar for so long that Randy, Tracy, both of you, I know how much it takes to keep going. It's a difficult path. It's not easy.
No, and it feels like a lot of it is no one's like making us accountable, right?
Yeah.
Really, the reality is no one's making us accountable, but we feel so accountable to continue and produce. I think over time for our listeners, because we have people who really like enjoy listening to our stuff and waits for like new episodes to drop. But at the end of the day, I think we all feel personally driven to have our narratives of our community heard too. I think what I love about Randy's too is that he is so like honest on his show. Sometimes I probably am overly polite because I try not to be too subjective. So I always come in with an objective point of view, and I kind of let the individual steer. But like Randy is very like confident and straightforward on his points of views, and I love it. And so that's what drives you, I'm sure, Randy, is being able to express that and then seeing what others have to say. It's not like you shun other points of views, but you're kind of setting the stage that it's okay to express it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what drives the three of us. It's us. No one's like, we're not getting paychecks that result in an episode being dropped.
No.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Tracy, and thank you for lifting that. I think when you begin a podcast, and have had people who are interested in becoming podcasters reach out to me, and I have to be very straightforward with them because one of the things that really hurts my heart, and I've seen this happen in the Cambodian community where there was a number of Cambodian podcasters and they just dropped out within a year, and it's
Hmm.
like I don't I don't like to go through that disappointment so much. So what I would tell them is, what is your mission? What is your why? I need to know your why because if you're going to have a podcast that's going to be very casual, like as if you're talking to your friends and not take it seriously, you're not going to last more than 5 episodes,
Yeah.
guaranteed. I mean, I was very upfront with that. Like I'm a podcast. Not only am I a podcaster, I'm a podcast listener, and I devote at least an hour or two when I'm either driving to work or when I'm taking my jogs. That I need to know that you have passion, that you have a level of expertise, but more importantly, curiosity in your work. I need to know that you have that curiosity to know what's going on with your subject, and that is something that drives my work because when I started doing the Banh Mi Chronicles, I come from more of an organizer background. I came more from a son of a refugee background that wants to hear stories, that want to hear stories that go beyond the stories that I'm familiar with. And it was very important for me to identify stories that are intersectional, that are deepened, that are layered, because my story is not the full entire Asian American landscape. It's not the full entire landscape of Vietnam or Cambodia. It's you want to bring in people who can help to deepen that because Asia as a continent on a global scale is into the billions. So my story is not speaking for the rest of the continent or rest of the globe. And it was very important for me to at least try to dig up people, not just people who are prolific, but people who are community members who have good stories. And this is another reason why I like your show, Tracy, is because you do encourage a lot of community members who are not who may not have had a platform on other shows, but at least on your platform that you see their stories as being unique and important to the history making that we're doing. So I think to make the long roundabout way of answering this is that your curiosity has to be the one that's driving your work, and that's how you build longevity. And your curiosity also has to tell you to take a break too,
Right.
because in order to gain more curiosity, you have to have pauses. And this is the reason why I do seasons, and this is the reason why I am eager to now take 3 to 6 months away so I can rest up and let my creativity build up and where my curiosity would again take over. So
Yeah, that's a great
it's
point.
important.
That yeah, that's a really good point that I completely agree. I do that too. I'll do like 20 episodes a month and then I'll just take like a month or two off. And that really does stimulate the curiosity. And if you don't do it, then it becomes stale. And after you're biting your lip, Randy, I'm curious what you're thinking. But
Yeah, 20 episodes a month. I'd be lucky
Oh
if I
my
could
God.
get
I
any
don't
more.
even want to share my numbers.
no, but our formats are so different though. I'm just like shooting at the off at the
I'm
hip.
like 8 episodes a season. If
Yeah, but it's so, the quality that both of you bring to the table is I'm just like hitting record and then I air it. So there's and that's another thing we can't compare it, right? Because it's just so the different formats that we're all doing. But I just wanted to agree with what Randy said about the break. You definitely need that break to kind of air out your brain to drive that curiosity.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention I love on your show, Kenneth, that you have episodes in Vietnamese for the interviews in Vietnamese. I think I sent you an email. Your Vietnamese is actually really good.
Thank you.
because
Appreciate it.
I'm always like embarrassed by mine. But I love it because when we say like not everyone's listening to podcasts, it's absolutely true. It's still growing, right? And
Yeah.
it's obviously popular now, but I think it's popular with a specific age group or range. And then when you talk about the Vietnamese generation, I mean, my parents aren't listening to podcasts. I don't know if yours are. And I love that you have a couple of episodes in Vietnamese because that's what I've been sharing with my mom to break her away from the YouTubes.
Mm. Mm.
Because I mean, the YouTubes meaning like, some of what's out there. And like they suck our parents in for hours. And so I know it's because it's in Vietnamese, right? And I know it's about talking about topics that, my parents can relate to, or they feel like, oh yeah, this is my generation. And so I think some of your episodes, because it's offered in Vietnamese, and that you have also a wide range of types of guests and age of those guests, that it's a way for us to grab those older audiences. Because I always tell people, like, I think the majority of people, I interview people from older generations, but they're not necessarily the ones listening to my show.
Right.
One, because normally I have to help them download an app on their phone and show them how to find my show. But the other reason is because, they're the ones that live through these experiences. They don't necessarily want to relive it with other people's stories. And I get that. So who I interview and who the audience is actually, for at least my show, it's a little bit different. But, it blends in some episodes.
Yeah, I also want to say that my mom listens to your show only because there's a Vietnamese parts of it, and when you have like the Paris by Night hosts on, my mom's gonna be very interested in listening to it. So it's interesting to me because it's funny how I can actually listen to your show and my mom can also listen to it as well, and we've actually listened to it together in the car, and I have yet to find shows like that where we could actually bond.
Mm.
Right. So I'm very thankful for your approach because it does matter and it gives permission for um, for our stories to be told, but it also gives permission for elders to know that they do matter. That time is not on our side because that generation is slowly transitioning out. So I'm really glad that you are very intentional about making sure that their stories are included and that you give that audience an opportunity to listen to these stories.
I'm grateful for
And
both of your kind words.
no, and on a lighter note, it helps me improve my Vietnamese by listening.
Awesome. The one thing that I don't want to have happen is like the three of us or the five people in Vietnamese podcast space becomes like this perceived gatekeeping community. And here's what I mean by that is like there's some
Hmm.
people that I want to interview and I just haven't gotten a chance to really get to because I'm not sure how to approach. And I feel it's just my own weird insecurity that it's being perceived like I'm gatekeeping, but it's not that. It's just I just don't know how to approach some topics or some guests
What do you mean by gatekeeping? Like you're not
yeah,
interviewing
because
them?
yeah, but gatekeeping is like, okay, that group is good enough to come on the podcast or that group's not good enough. Like
I
my
see.
my my perception is like the gatekeeping of what good culture is. I don't that's why I don't like that's why I quiver in my boots when I think about like I wish there were like people who are just a little bit older than me doing the Vietnamese Paris by Night community or shoe collectors, sneakerheads that are doing that are Vietnamese, but they do sneakerhead stuff in Vietnam. And that way we could have a really rounded out community of podcasting and showcasing and amplifying more voices. But I really get insecure about and that's why I just try to do more because I feel like I'm just trying to amplify more stories and
Yeah,
get to more stories.
I mean, I think by encouraging more podcasters to come to the space, we can help create platforms where more people can feel like they have opportunities to share their story. I mean, I would say, what I would encourage is if somebody wants to be in the podcast space, really think about what types of stories, topics, or what are they trying to bring forward to the listener that's different? Because otherwise, you just have all these choices that our listeners then are like, well, what's making them different, right? And I think their time is valuable too. So if you're going to start a podcast, think about what you're bringing to the table that's different for a listener, because their time should be valued. But it is an opportunity for podcasters to create shows that again gives these platforms but is still unique in its own, like we talked about the uniqueness of ours. I share something similar in terms of experience. I don't necessarily categorize what we do as gatekeeping, because we are quite selective on what we share on the
Yeah.
show. But we do that because we get tons of inquiries of people who want to promote their work, and I celebrate that. But our mission isn't about that. It's about individual stories and experiences. And at the end of the day, I do tell people our podcast is a show. And so with every show and every season, I think of it as a mini series. And so, I want every episode to be engaging. I mean, that's kind of my goal. Every episode is engaging. And for those reasons, we are selective. However, we have other programs that we've developed for the sole purpose of what you just shared, is
Mhm.
like, I don't want that to prevent you from sharing your story. We encourage blog sharing. We actually publish 100% of blogs that come our way. We do
Wow.
provide people feedback just to, help them kind of make the story a little bit tighter for a reader. Our Journeys Map platform is designed to have people submit their stories so that we can display it. Phase 2 will be way better looking. My data is kind of clunky right now, but that was created because I knew that our team doesn't have the manpower to record every story that people, put in front of us. But I wanted to create something that every story is valued. And so the Journeys Map is something that we're building so that anybody can submit their story. It will be profiled. We're going to have filters where people can search different types of stories that have been submitted. So I think there's other ways to do it, because to your point, Kenneth, I mean, you're probably producing so much because you want to be able to share everything that's out there in our community, but it's not feasible for you, right? And so I think that we just have to have more podcasters in this space, making unique shows, providing more opportunities for the shareholders, story holders, and other platforms that they can share it on. It doesn't have to be a podcast,
Right.
Like we said, not everybody listens to a podcast. There's other platforms to showcase these stories.
Amen to that. And I think just echoing what Tracy just beautifully mentioned is, I think when when I do a podcast, I keep I'm very big on seasons. I'm very big on themes. And I think it's something that you're very familiar with, Tracy, because I do get inquiries from people that want to be on my show, and sometimes not all of them understand my mission. And I have to relay to them and say, hey, this is the angle that I'm going at. This is the reason why I don't do open inquiries for people, because I pick my guests and I do my research on my guests. And I have to look at the way it's being curated between each guest for that season. I look in terms of equity. I look in terms of the kind of stories that they have that's very similar to the theme. And unfortunately, it it doesn't help that there aren't very many of us in that landscape, in that sphere, right? So I would always encourage them to uh, start their own content. I tell them that we have there's it can't just be us doing the work. If you have a story, there's opportunities to do it, whether it's through blogging, whether it's through TikTok, whether it's through YouTube. There's opportunities out there, because what used to be 20 years ago, it was a lot harder. The gatekeeping culture was so strong, right? And now that we have freedom to use these platforms, people are finding these contents a lot easier these days. I mean, I'm finding new people almost every day on my Instagram, and some of them end up being on my show because they answer a lot of the things that I want on my mission. So, yeah, I think that anytime I have to say no to a guest, I would sometimes refer to other podcasters. I will refer to people that I know as best as I can. I could try to find ways to be supportive in their work, but I can't be everything to everyone. And I think that's something I've learned along the way is you just can't be everything to everyone. You can't take on the burden of covering the landscape of Vietnamese Americans. I can't be responsible for telling the stories of Cambodian Americans. There's got to be other people involved here. I can only tell part of mine, and my show is not just on Vietnamese and Cambodian people. They involve South Asians, they involve East Asians, they involve a plethora of Asian Americans, and there's too many to cover, and I can only cover a tiny pebble out of an ocean.
Can
Yeah, I mean, I sorry to interrupt, Kenneth. Just one more thing. I think that's why the VPP Journeys map is such a big mission of mine. Is because we are trying to lead people to the platform to say, don't wait for us to record your story and put it on the podcast. Like, share your story here, and it's going to be documented. And we're trying to create a space so that every story gets highlighted, because we want that. But we there's only so many hours in the day. And Kenneth, I think you're being too hard on yourself. You're not being a gatekeeper, but you have to like prioritize, right?
Yeah,
And
I
you
mean,
have
I've
to
had
figure out.
friends who've said it. It's like, well, why don't you let that person on or that person, and and then I have to defend it. But that's just, that's just part of the territory. I get it. And as I'm listening to both of you here, I just had a crazy thought, and I
Well,
literally
me
just
too. Share yours first.
okay. I just had a crazy thought right now. Are we open to perhaps sometimes in the distant future putting on like a 2-day summit for Southeast Asian podcasters somewhere in the Midwest, right in the middle of the country? And
Chicago.
Chicago would be great. I love Chicago. We do it, and it's just a 2-day thing. The three of us will put it together and invite anybody who's interested in becoming part of the landscape of the Southeast Asian podcast community to come out, and then we can set up some seminars or and we just do it for free in the beginning. We just set up something where we are kind of spreading community vibe and really dedicated to kind of spreading the word and the mission of Southeast Asian, more voices amplified.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I wasn't thinking anything too large scale. I had a much smaller thought, but I love having a seminar. I mean, I think, we can even start out of doing something live online and calling people, hey, if you're interested in podcasting, we'd love to share with you our experience or answer your questions, just to see what kind of interest is out there. But I love the idea of gathering us together, being a community, us sharing our experiences, letting people kind of craft their creative ideas of what their show might be, and making it smaller. I think it's important because, there are so many podcast festivals out there, both online and in person nowadays. And I think for someone who's starting out, it can feel intimidating when you kind of go to some of these bigger events.
Yeah, I don't
Oh
know if
Um,
yeah.
it'd be a festival. It would just be like hopefully 10 people, 15
yeah,
people.
that's what I was saying.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
something small and
Oh, because
intimate and
if
hands-on and
if
cultivating people who are really serious about this.
if somebody's dedicating their weekend to fly out to Chicago,
Mhm.
maybe they that's dedication, and that just shows. Even if we get 10 or just a dozen people to come and spend the weekend, and we can sort of like talk about our experience and help them along and help craft like a mission and just kind of like really bring this part of the podcast landscape up. I think that would be very fun to do.
Yeah, we should do something online small to see what interest is out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I agree with Tracy on this because, yeah, I think right now it's hard for people to travel, and I think at this time it'd be good to kind of just get a quick snapshot and just build the momentum. But yeah, an in person eventually can work. too. But I think it also has to start small. It has to start somewhat hyper community
Yeah,
based.
hyper community based.
Yeah. And also like thinking about who do we connect with as far as whether it's a university or an organization. It's a possibility. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great opportunity for younger and older audiences that are very curious about their stories. And even if it's not a podcast, they may create another platform out of it. And
That's a
yeah,
good idea. Hooking up with other groups and organizations like Pivot or Divan, where they have people that are actually have to ask me to kind of like talk to them about podcasting for their members in the future. So yeah, that's a great idea to team up with other organizations.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
And you know what, Kenneth, maybe even for another talk, we can invite like the hosts of overseas Vietnam,
Wait, the what?
the overseas Vietnamese, and then
Yes. Ooh.
growing up Nguyen. They were on our Story Slam this past year. It's four Nguyen's siblings who started their own podcast. I don't know how many episodes they have, but like it would be fun to invite some of the other podcast shows, and maybe have like five or six of us
Absolutely. I
on a call.
completely agree. Randy, were you going to say something?
oh no, I wasn't.
Okay. Well, what's in store for us? What can we expect for 2023?
Okay, so I'm gonna get back into podcasting again. I was taking a hiatus and I was really burned out, and I'm currently working on my capstone, and so it's a lot to deal with. And as a result, the hiatus has been very good to me, and it's actually giving me more clarity. It's giving me more ideas to work with. So for next season, my eighth season's gonna start. It's gonna come out beginning of 2023, and I have named it. I have named the theme. It's called "A Hero Comes Along," which is definitely a take on a Mariah Carey song. If y'all,
Mariah.
I know, it's a very sappy reference, but I decided, but
Love it.
that's that just came up for me, and
Love Mariah.
I'm actually looking to introduce guest hosts onto my show as well.
Oh, I
And I
love
think,
that idea.
yeah, I'm very excited about it. And it was the idea that Amy Emley, who Tracy, is a dear friend of mine, and she's like, you should have some guest hosts. Maybe that'll take up some of the burden from you. And I'm like, I think it's a great idea, but I think it'll also help me to lessen the tight grip that I've had on my show from the beginning, which I think in a way contributed to my burnout
Mm.
because I was doing the producing, the curating, the narration, editing, promotion, scheduling. I did all of that. And it kind of wears on you after a while, especially after 3 years and nearly 100 episodes. So I decided I wanted to change some routines that I've been accustomed to. So the idea of introducing guest hosts is certainly something I'm looking forward to doing. I'm eager to share some of my new guests that I'm gonna have on, and I'm also looking to do a Instagram live feature. It's still up. It's still in the early infancy stage. It might be a once a month experiment, but it'll go beyond the Asian American lens. I'd like to interview other BIPOC creators, and I'd like to probably start off more hyper local first. So that also might enter into the conversation. So I'm looking forward to what 2023 looks like, and I hopefully it won't be as hectic as this year has been.
Very cool. Tracy?
Yeah, so we're working on a new season. It probably won't be produced by 2023. So I think what we have been talking about, which you're hearing it first on this discussion, is re-releasing some of our older episodes with follow-ups with some of the interviewees. I know
Very
a lot of
cool.
people that have been on our show. The specific moment where I interview them, they're going through a very like intensive personal journey, right? And it would be actually kind of interesting 2 years later to see where they are in that journey, like and even have them kind of reflect back on their own story and interview 2 years ago and where they are today. So we've been toying with that concept. The only reason why we're pausing on releasing, 100% new episodes, we'll have a couple new ones, but my mission for the next stage of the podcast is I'd like to be in community more than we've been able to. I started in October 2018, and 2019 we were gaining a lot of traction. So we started doing a couple like on location community pop-up recordings. And then, as you know, the pandemic hit and we just haven't done them since. So my mission for next year is to be back on location in some areas. I've already got some space in New York City where we're going to release some recording dates. But I'd like to do some other pockets of the country and be in community, because the thing is, most of our stories is people coming to us sharing, and then we're kind of recording and then navigate what we want to be on the show. But like you guys know, there's so many stories out there, and the community from fascinating people, that don't really know that we exist unless we're out there saying your story is important. And I think that work is important for us as a nonprofit, because it's not just to source content for the show, but we're building an archive as a nonprofit, right? And we're trying to create this collection. So, a lot of moving pieces, actually a lot more work. I thought I would lessen my load, but I've actually created more load. But I think it's important. I feel like it's the next evolution for us. And we were trying to get there in 2019, and, just COVID put a huge stop to it.
Yeah.
And I just want to be back out there, and I want to be like, talking to like your parents, your aunts and uncles, my parents' friends, like just kind of like telling them, what we're all about and hoping they'll share their stories.
Yeah, that's amazing. I for 2023 want to get into more risque guests that I think I've been very conservative with the people that have come on. I want to get people that I didn't have the courage to bring on in the last 2 years. There's a lot of like controversial rappers, or there's people that are more like political dissidents that are coming out of Vietnam, and bringing more guests from Vietnam on, and just stretching the idea of what Viet Thanh Nguyen has said. We need plenitude in our narratives. We can't just have the model, literature figures and the people who are in film and doing good things. I want to bring on more people in the incarceration space. And, so I want to just stretch a little bit more in 2023. And the other thing I want, and I've been talking about all year, is to have the shorter segments, the 8-minute, like talking into a camera, talking about certain topics that I haven't been able to really pull off. I write a lot, but I haven't really had the courage to really look into a camera. That's very difficult work for me. So those two things, I want to definitely bring on like riskier guests and not play it too safe, as safe as.
Do you want to mention any of the guests you're thinking, or no, not yet?
Yeah, I mean, I'm bringing on a longtime friend of mine. He's a rapper, is an old rapper from the Bay Area, and he just he raps about real like marijuana a lot, about weed and women, and it's really controversial, and he's a friend of mine that I've really debated. We've talked a lot about coming on, and I just, for one reason or another, I just, I think internally I haven't pulled the trigger, but now I'm going to do it because, I think the time is now. And
yes, I think so too. I mean, I think it's so important for us to think about how our shows evolve. Because I mean, I feel like I'm probably the veteran here, but it's like when we started this, all three of us were in different places in our lives, right? And so like our show is a very specific way. And then slowly you could probably notice us expanding to different spaces. But that's a reflection of our own growth, right? And so that's how I feel too. And some of the topics that I'm very much a fan of where you're going with this, because some of the topics that I want to explore in our next set of new series is, well, we've already released a theme. It's going to be then and now. And really the idea is, yes, we're about preserving history and experiences, but we want to really talk about where has it evolved today? You know, where are the gaps? Where is there still tension? Where are there divide between generations or communities within our culture? You know, and that exists. And to your point, it's like we can't just talk about all the rosy good stuff that we've been doing. We've got to talk about both because we are very dynamic as a community. And so it sounds like all of us are kind of already stretching towards that path. And I think that's exciting because that's kind of where our minds
Yeah.
naturally go as the show grows, right?
I'm scared shitless, to be honest with you, because I
We'll
don't,
be
some
fine.
some of the lyrics are misogynistic. They're, all of that stuff that scares me. But I guess I just have to call it out
We
on the
can have a
show.
we can have a prep talk on that too if you want,
Yeah.
because like for me that doing these kinds of interviews gives me curiosity. And like I know a year and a half ago I interviewed Helen Zia, who is a known Asian American activist who um, was actually um, I'm having a brain fart at the moment. She was advocating for Vincent Chin's family after he was murdered 40 years ago. And we were having this debate about police abolition, and she actually was more on the reform side. And I had to challenge her on that. And actually, not long after that, she told one of my friends that she felt like she was backed into a corner with that. And she's
Mm.
like, I hope that the abolitionist organizers aren't going to come after her about that. So, but I did not, I wasn't trying to go there,
Yeah.
but I felt like I had to because I needed clarification. And sometimes the worst thing you could do is being too safe and too cute.
Hmm.
You know, like you have to have a way, not because you disagree with them, but because you need clarification. You also realize that for your audience, you want them to know that there is a level of accountability, but there's also a level of let's just not skate this without getting questions in. And I feel like when I go into a show, it's very important for me to just not to go after them. That's not my
Right.
goal.
Exactly.
It's basically because you're there because what they're talking about is very complex and it needs a way um to at least I don't know if it's the right I don't know how to frame this, but that's at least in a way that audiences can understand where they're coming from, where their roots are coming from, how they came to this idea or how they came to this work that they're doing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be, you know, it's important on, I guess, the delivery. And I think Kenneth, your delivery, I don't think would ever be offensive. Because I think when you put a guest in a position where they have to defend their point of view or their work, that's where things get like
Dicey.
contentious.
Yeah.
Yeah, dicey.
Yeah.
But you know, when you're coming from the perspective that Randy just mentioned, where it's true curiosity, right, of trying to understand the thought process behind something or a point of view or a piece of work. So I think it comes back to like the delivery of, you know, how you interview and how you question and stuff. And you got that down.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
I feel
both.
like you're a cheerleader.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. The hour went by so quick, and we should revisit this idea of like yearly coming on around this time because this is sort of our all of our anniversary, and maybe get on an IG live, in the next few months to probably talk about open submissions for this event, the precursor to the event that we want to put on.
Yeah, does IG Live work well for you guys? I've only tried it a few
Yeah,
times.
it's fun.
It does.
It's fun, but I think if the three of us came on and we just like let our channels and our different audience know, I think it'll be a very fun thing to do and engaging.
Sounds good.
Thank you
Yeah.
both.
It was so fun. Fun Friday
Yes.
afternoon.
Well, thank you so much for bringing us on.
Well, hope to see you both soon. I know Randy's going to be coming out here to the West Coast soon, and Tracy, if you ever come out, I'd love to meet up.
I would love that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know, meaning like I don't know when I'll ever make it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yes, I would love that. All right.
Wonderful. Well, have a wonderful weekend, both of you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.